Hey everyone, Bill Parish here from GTT Audio, and welcome to the channel today. Today I wanted to talk about a subject, just touch on a subject that is asked constantly, RCA or XLR cables. And it's one of these things, it's not a super easy answer. You need to think about a couple of things and make a decision about it. But it's asked so many times, and we could get into we could have very, very long discussions about this. And this is just a little teaser to give you a little bit of information and prompt you to think about this a little bit. So, RCA or XLR cables. First of all, I guess the easy answer is there's nothing wrong with RCA cables. And you can use RCA cables for very, very long runs. I'm sitting in front of a system right now, and we've got 3 sets of 14-meter RCA cables, 14-meter RCA cables, 3 sets of them out of the preamplifier. No noise, super quiet. I mean, I've seen it, I've read it, I've heard manufacturers talk that XLR cables only start to make sense when they are 40 meters or longer. You know, it was originally developed and used the reject noise for mic cables, and in studios it was a professional format. I don't know if anyone was using XLR cables in hi-fi before the 90s. I mean, maybe, don't quote me on that, but I can tell you very few. You know, BAT came out and started to make it popular. Audio Research started to implement it, but in the 80s, there weren't, you know, early Krell amps didn't have any XLR cables. Levinson didn't have XLR. It was all single-ended RCA. So, you know, I guess it's way past a marketing fad at this point, 30 years later. But, you know, I think that's how it initially started out. So, let's talk about XLR cables for a minute. There's, in the connectors themselves, first of all, the connection, and a lot of times isn't as high quality as an RCA connector, but it is certainly more secure. It doesn't have a weak point of a pin holding itself in. So, and it's more reliable. I mean, from a reliability standpoint and from a security standpoint, XLR all day long. But sonically, sometimes RCA can be better. So, but there's balance, and then there's pseudo-balanced. And pseudo-balanced, I think, it's single-ended is what pseudo-balanced is. Pseudo-balanced is a XLR connector with the pin 2 and pin 1 and pin 2 connected. 1 for ground, 2 for hot. Pin 3 is floated. And that is a pseudo-balanced, it should not say balanced, it's an XLR connector on RCA. There are some single-ended tube amplifier companies that use that, maybe some other companies, and you know, it's a single-ended connection. It's not a balanced connection. But as far as balanced connections, I mean, there's 3 types, and they are all 3 truly balanced. There are, and then there's circuits. Most circuits today are single-ended circuits. There's very few true differential balanced circuits out there. True differential balanced is 2 amplifiers. Let's talk about amplifiers. This could be in a DAC and it could be in a preamp and everything. But 2 amplifiers that, that are parallel and connected to the XLR connector. I mean, it's two of exactly the same parts, boards, etc., all the way through. This is true differential balanced. And to me, this is just an opinion, but to me, this is where XLR cables and connectors make the most sense. Outside of a true differential balanced circuit, if a amplifier or preamplifier or DAC doesn't have that, then I don't see why it's important to use an XLR connector. Let me explain. And there's very, very, very few pieces that are truly differential balanced. And one of the reasons is it costs twice as much to make. And, you know, if a single-ended amplifier, I mean, let's just say if all things were equal, which they never are, but if all things were equal and you had a $25,000 single-ended amplifier over here and you had a $25,000 dual differential amplifier over here, well, really, that amplifier is $12,500 because there's two $12,500 amplifiers there, so maybe that single-ended one's better. A thought? I don't know. Maybe you think I'm crazy. Perhaps that's a strange way of thinking of it, but it is a way of thinking of it. The other two types of doing truly balanced, and I touched on this briefly in a previous episode, but you can have a transformer. So it's a single-ended circuit internally, whether it's a preamplifier, amplifier, DAC, etc. But the output and inputs are truly balanced. And you do that through a transformer. And this is the most popular way to do it in studio. Now, I don't like that way. Sure, it's truly balanced, and yes, it quiets noise and all that other great stuff. But it always, 100% of the time, compresses dynamics. It's impossible not to. And most of these transformers they're not very big, and most of them aren't built that great. There are some really good ones, but they all have a little bit of a sound, and they always compress dynamics. It's just what transformers do. There's no way getting around it. So, okay, to me, I say leave that way of doing balance to the pros. If there's a amplifier and a preamplifier out there that's transformer coupled outputs and inputs, and I'm going to use the RCAs. I'm not going to go through those transformers if I don't have to, because also I don't care how long of cables I use. Remember, I said I use 14-meter cables, but I use good cables that actually have a patent on keeping the noise out. So if I'm not worried about noise getting into my cables, why do I care if they're single-ended or balanced? The third way of doing true balanced is through an op-amp, which is a little piece of circuitry that they put on the output and input of amplifiers to give you the truly balanced input and output. But this is just my opinion, but if it has RCAs as well, why do you want to go through extra pieces of circuitry? Now, AudioNet, for example. That's all. Wait, these are the only three ways of doing it. So everyone with an XLR output is one or the other. Dual differential. So usually I think you're getting a lesser circuitry, but you're getting two of that circuitry in there. You can do a transformer balance with which I think I explained that clear enough. And then there's this op amp, which is pieces of circuitry. And why go through that if you don't need to? And so I was starting to say AudioNet. That's how they do it, along with 90% of the other high-end companies. But their circuitry is so transparent and so clean, you can absolutely hear it. It doesn't mean they don't know how to make an op amp. It's the best op amp on the market today. But they know how to make a circuit so transparent and so revealing that if you take Kabbalah Sosna XLR and Kabbalah Sosna RCA, both 1.5 meters, and one to the XLR and one to the RCA, and you do the AB, every time you will like RCA. Does that mean that AudioNet doesn't like XLR cables? That's not really what I'm saying here. I'm just, even though, I've explained this to some reviewers, you can't breathe around a reviewer without them printing it. So, they print this, that AudioNet sounds better with RCAs. Well, yeah. But you know what? If you actually tried that with 90% of the other equipment that you used, you'd say the same thing. But maybe other manufacturers and distributors aren't nearly as honest, transparent, and as revealing, and don't even know themselves or don't want that information out there. But I want you to have the best sound. And to have the best sound, you need to be armed with good information. So, when you're choosing cable, now listen, let me back up a little bit and clarify some things before this gets blown out of proportion, because audiophiles like to blow things out of proportion. At GTT, when I'm demoing AudioNet, I am using RCA cables. I would say half of the time when I'm at a trade show, I'm using XLR cables because I'm taking what Kabbalah Sosna has in stock. They're our supplier of cables. We do shows with them, so that's what we do. Now, I would not do a trade show if I thought it would sound bad. And I can tell you that the differences between RCA and XLR, you can hear it in your room at home, but with a 70 dB noise floor that's at a trade show, you can't hear the difference. Okay, so that's why it's okay. We're talking minimal differences here, but differences you can hear. And that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to educate, I'm trying to teach, or at least give you information to think about. But I don't want someone to come away from this conversation and think that all XLR cables are bad, or Parish over at GTT said that don't ever use an XLR cable. I didn't say that. I'm not saying that. I'm just giving you information. There's 3 ways to do XLRs, or balanced inputs and outputs. There's 3 ways. Dual differential, and if you've got a dual differential amplifier or preamplifier, use an XLR cable. It's the only thing that makes sense. If you have a transformer balanced input or output, or an op amp input or output, you might want to try RCA. And obviously, if you have single-ended, you might want to try RCA. It's probably the only way you can do it, unless you've got one of those where they call it pseudo-balance, which is just stupid. It's single-ended on an XLR connector. Anyway, I hope this makes a little bit of sense. Like I said, I could take this conversation and we could go on for days about this. And there's a huge debate amongst manufacturers about XLR, RCA, should you do transformers, should you do op amps, dual differentials, the only way to go. I would never do dual differential, there's twice the amount of room for error, and so on and so forth. That's not what this is about. This is about to provoke some thought and to have some conversations the next time you're buying cables, the next time you're buying equipment. How's it made? What's it work best with? So you, when you get home, get the best sound that you can. That's all this is about. And by no means is it, am I shaming people that do dual differential amplifiers, or those that do pseudo-balanced amplifiers, or those that do transformer balanced, or op amp balanced. It's not about that. It's to let you know that there's 3 different ways to do balanced. If you should, I just daily, today I had 2 conversations. Well, should I use XLR or should I use RCA? And that's what this is about. Most equipment is on the balanced inputs and outputs have op amps. I don't know. Is it 90%? Is it 85%? Is it 80%, 70? It's somewhere in there. I'll say, I guarantee you it's between 70 and 90%. And then you've got, I don't know, a handful of things out there that use transformers, and then there's just a very small percentage that are dual differential. For example, like how MBL, when I used to represent MBL. So the preamplifier was a single-ended gain, single-ended preamplifier all the way through. But we used an XLR output that had a transformer, so it was transformer output into their amplifiers that had 2 sets of RCAs or a balanced input. And so what that was is that the RCA inputs could turn that into a stereo amp because it's got 2 channels. The balanced input, when you plugged it into the balance, you bridged those 2 channels into a single channel. You had the negative channel and the plus channel, which gave you dual differential balanced. So if you wanted to have a dual differential balanced amplifier and take advantage of both of those amplifier sections in the amplifier, if you wanted to use the amplifier to its full potential, then you had to go balanced input. So therefore, you needed to use the XLR output, which in this case happened to have a transformer. That's how it was transformer balanced. MBL makes phenomenal preamplifiers and phenomenal amplifiers. So as you can see, this isn't putting anything down the way anyone makes it. All what this is arming you with the right information and prompting you to ask the right questions so you use the right cables with the right electronics. It's a generic question, but it's not a generic answer. With that, I'm going to get out of here. If you like this type of conversation, please hit the like button. Please share it with your friends. Feel free to comment below, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.